Mr. Speaker, I want to second and support this motion report that emanated from our sittings as members of this committee. And in my support, I want to take a three-pronged approach because I just want to talk about three things. And Mr. Speaker, you realize that CFS expenditures is an expenditure that we can do nothing much about it because they are first charge of the consolidated fund services. Because we have to pay our debts, we have to pay the offices of the president, the deputy president, independent commissions, and other independent offices. And of course, that comes as the first charge. And therefore, this report gives power to Treasury to do just that within any fiscal year. And Mr. Speaker, looking at the numbers and figures, then Kenyans should be worried as to where we are as a country. Because you can imagine, a year like the year 2024-25, we have an expectation that we're going to collect about 3 trillion from revenue. And out of it, 2 trillion will have to be spent on loans and interest. In fact, 2 trillion, 1.9 trillion, 1 trillion is going to pay interest on our loans. 900 billion will be the component that will be paying the principal. Therefore, it means that more than 2/3 of our revenue is going to repayment of debts. And in fact, I believe as the first speaker has just spoken, the Honorable MBADI, the former member of Suba South, and a leader in this house, has some work to do into coming up with a solution as to how we are going to fix this issue of debt. The defeating or rather withdrawal of Finance Bill 2024 even poses more challenge to the Ministry of, that is the Treasury, because we denied ourselves, or we were denied an opportunity to collect a whole 346 billion, and which would have gone a long way in bridging the fiscal deficit that we have, or that has increased now because of the failure of passage of that bill to the tune of 765 billion. We'll have to look for somewhere to raise that money. And Mr. Speaker, it doesn't make things better. And I want to say, were it not for God who was on our side, this country would have collapsed. It would have collapsed because today we are faced with demonstrations and protests that are really going to shrink again our revenue collection. If these protests are going to be sustained, or if we're not going to get a solution to stop them, then our country will go down the way many other failed states have done, and we pray that, God forbid, that should not be the case. You know, we are enjoying a good time economically, so to say. Look at inflation. We are at 4.5, yet we have had these challenges. Thank God for the rains. Thank God for the food production that we've been enjoying. Because if we were importing all this stuff, then things would have been worse. Thank God for the stability of the shilling, because despite the protests that are ongoing, our shilling still continues to be strong. As at yesterday, I had an opportunity to even engage in Forex, and the dollar was changing at 130. And that means then that for quite some time now, we've had a sustained stability in our shilling. Mr. Speaker, there's an issue that has been mentioned on the issue of single treasury account. It is self-defeating for a country like Kenya, as much as we want to take care of the local banks that we have, so that then we have every government agency and entities having bank accounts in commercial banks. The chunk of the money that we borrow, if you are to look at our borrowing mix, like now the proposed one is 55 to 45. 55 domestic borrowing, 45 foreign borrowing. This 55% means then that we're going to borrow locally in excess of 400 billion. All these monies are going to come from commercial banks. Let's look at the flip side of it. How much money do we have that is going to distract me. But anyway, Mr. Speaker, I beg that you all be more time so that I'm able to prosecute my case. How much money does government entities have in commercial banks? Failure to have single treasury account. We are forced to borrow our own money because it is our money or the government's money that the government keeps on borrowing. Mr. Speaker, this issue of single treasury account must be brought to fruition. It must be brought it must be actualized, because it's going to save us from borrowing our own money and paying interest that are unwarranted and actually causing interest rates to go high because of high demand coming from the government in terms of domestic borrowing. Mr. Speaker,
how long do you need to complete the contribution, and also, elaborate further the last point you are making on the single, you call it single what? Single treasury account. Give him 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your magnanimity and generosity. On the issue of single treasury account, what we're saying is government entities or the government corporations should not run unwarranted bank accounts. We should have one account in central bank whereby all the monies are consolidated, so that then in the event that the government wants to borrow any idle money, then they do not need to go to commercial banks, but can spend their own money, and as they collect, then they can keep pushing the monies to the entities that require them, as at that time when they require them. We've witnessed massive corruption, Mr. Speaker, through entities having bank accounts and negotiating for interest rates with banks that are not accounted for. And I think the way to go is the developing or inception of single treasury account. The other issue, Mr. Speaker, that I would want to speak on is the issue of pension. We have pensioners who retired 5-10 years ago. They have not been paid their lump sum payments. Reason? That there have been authority for the money to be spent from consolidated fund, but because of liquidity or other issues, you realize that they are not paid. But that is not the issue, Mr. Speaker. And I think as a parliament, we must pronounce ourselves on this. There is a lot of corruption that is happening, because you cannot convince me the reason as to why someone who retired in the year 2020 and another one retired in the year 2024, the one who retired in 2024 has received the lump sum payment and they are receiving their monthly pension, whereas the latter has not received. It is something that we need to really look into. And actually, my recommendation is that we should have a first in, first out. Whoever retired last should be the should wait for the person who retired first to first of all receive their pensions, so that then there is that seamless payment that is not going to be seen to be favorable in terms of who knows who in the technical ranks in the pensions department. Mr. Speaker, you can, if you look keenly, you'll realize that pensions are exponentially increasing. The question that we should be asking ourselves as a country is this trend sustainable? And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to join those who are asking what should be the retirement age of our civil servants, because the sooner they retire, the more that we're going to depress this pace of pensions, so that then we'll be paying so much for our people who have the ability to be working in the government, but then there is also issue of creating employment for the young people. So it is really a balance, because if we decide now that every civil servant must retire at 60, then there's something else that we'll also be saying that will be straining our CFS expenditure in terms of the amount of pensions that we should be paying. Mr. Speaker, I want to support this report, and I want to bring members to speed that if it's one area that we need to focus on is the issue of public debt, because it's really depressing this country. Mr. Speaker, I second the report.
So questions are first proposed. The Honorable Dr. Wilberforce Oundo. Before I do that, I just wanted to, listening to both Honorable Thuku Kwenya and the Honorable Dr. David Makali, I don't think we have a reason to mourn the Honorable MBADI joining the Treasury.